Well, welcome to our next segment of our webinar series. We're here today with Samantha Russell from the Alaskans from Palmer Hayflats and the Eagle River Nature Center. And she's going to talk to us a little bit about how the community supports the refuge system and how they're able to do some of the work that we may not be able to do in reinforcement of our fish and game goals. So with that, I'll turn it over to Samantha.
Awesome. So I'm Samantha Russell. I included a picture not because I'm vain, but because I know for those of you watching in the webinar, we just kind of look like stick-figure blobs, but I am a real person. And I'm a naturalist at the Eagle River Nature Center, and I'm a proud board member of the Alaskans for Palmer Hayflats. I've been in Alaska for 5 years, and I've spent as much of that time as possible outside exploring public lands with my dog. So, the plan for today is to define what a friends group is and kind of get a good sense of what refuges are, talk about how citizens groups support refuges and other government lands, give you guys a good survey of what friends groups are around in Alaska, and there are a lot of them, and then kind of discuss specific refuge field trip opportunities in South Central and, because of my connections, of course, with the Palmer Hayflats, and then to talk just a little bit about barriers to two different field trips that you might be experiencing as an instructor, as a teacher. And so first, with friend groups, what they are is they're nonprofit organizations. They're almost always place-specific, so you're never going to see like a land trust be considered a Friends of organization. Their missions are fundamentally different. And what they can do is they build bridges between people and government management groups. So other organizations that have, or it's just about any public land that you can think of would have a Friends of group. So most refuges have them, many state parks have them, public like playground parks, some of those even exist in Alaska as a Friends of group. Libraries have them, museums have them. They're a really common support organization. And so how are they formed? It starts with people getting excited about what's going on, and they start talking to each other. And they start realizing that there's something in their community that needs help, that needs more than whoever is charged with caring for them can give. So they start, the next step is to get to know who's in charge of caring for that place. So in the refuge system, that would mean getting to know your refuge manager, and then kind of starting to understand how those systems are regulated. So you want to know how the systems work so that you can help enhance how they actually function. And so once you know who you're working with, how the systems work, you have other passionate people around with you, you have all these great ideas for things that you want to accomplish, then you need to formalize a vision for what's going on. And these visions are usually on every Friends of organization's website, and we'll touch on those in just a little bit. But after you have a vision, that's your plan, and it's going to tell you what you're going to be doing, how it helps that place move forward. And from that vision, you pick out realistic, achievable goals that help to complete those missions. And those goals are what you're working on. As a Friends of group, if you're looking for grant monies to help support this, this is what you're talking about. This is what you brag about. And after you have these goals that help to complete the vision, you figure out who else you need. That might mean reaching out to other nonprofits in the area. That might mean partnering with different school groups. That might mean finding retired substitute teachers in the neighborhood who can help spend some of their extra time enhancing these things going on. And then you get out there and you make it happen. And so roughly, there are three kinds of friends groups that occur. And this is right from the Federal Fish and Wildlife Services Refuge Friends of website. They have a handy guide to tell you how it goes. And these are specific examples. So one example would be of the Friends of Back Bay National Wildlife Refuge. What they wanted to do is focus on adding land to the wildlife refuge and lobbying government organizations. These are things that the folks who are in charge of the refuge can't necessarily do as government employees. They can't necessarily, within that role, be lobbying for public policy changes within that specific space. So this organization formed to help promote those ideas. And so they don't necessarily have a formal agreement with Fish and Wildlife Service, but they would have they would promote causes on the refuge, bring people out, help facilitate stewardship, things like that. So the way to sum that one up would be to think of it as lobbying and land acquisition. The next one is from Minnesota Valley National Wildlife Refuge, where their mission is to conserve and protect natural and cultural resources. And conserve, protect cultural and natural resources is something you'll see across missions, across visions. And with the activities being educating the public, fundraising so that you have money for materials to support the education programs, helping to provide information to congressional leaders. So informing politicians is different than lobbying politicians. And that's an important distinction to make. And then they don't have any formal agreements, or they do have formal agreements with Fish and Wildlife Service based on different projects. So as needed, the Friends of group might be contracted to build a new boardwalk or find somebody to make new trail signs or things like that, or new and better trail signs, or to do a land survey, things like that. And then the third rough category, the example is of the Senior Natural History Association, and it's operating a sales outlet. So they have a cooperation association sales agreement with the Fish and Wildlife Service, and proceeds from the sales go directly to support educational and interpretive activities. So they're selling things as a means of raising extra monies to support the overall mission of the Natural History Association. Something I should back up and talk about just real quick too is throughout all of this, when I talk about refuges, when I talk about parks, there's different levels of government associated with them. There's state level government, there's federal level government, and then things like, I will touch on this again in a second, and then there's different land uses, but I wanted to make sure levels of government were included on this slide. Perfect. So we've talked about what a friends group is. We talked about how you put one together. We broke them down into three kind of different categories. And now I want to talk about what they do. This is another handy infographic from the from the federal level. But friends groups overall within the federal wildlife system or the National Wildlife Refuge system have tons and tons and tons of members. Those are people who pay maybe an annual fee to stay informed, and they just kick in money that's unrestricted to do whatever the organization wants to do. They've helped to raise lots of money in conservation funding. They restore habitat. They build community partnerships across different organizations. They do outreach. They host special events to bring all sorts of different kinds of groups onto the refuge. And a big piece of what a lot of these groups do is environmental education. And so more specifically, or putting it in a different way, they do community outreach. They provide publications so people can have a sense of what's going on in the area around them. Alaskans for Palmer Hayflats has a bird guide to the refuge. And I know that other different organizations have different publications that they've put together. They raise awareness of what's going on. They act as stewards and watchdogs. These are the people who are passionate about the place, and so they end up on the ground. They see a lot of the changes, and they can help make the people in the management positions of the refuges or of these public lands aware of what's actually going on. And then they also help to advise management decisions, where they can say, like, well, actually, as the people who use this area, we would like to see it move in this direction rather than this direction, or have you guys considered doing this rather than this? It would really make our lives much easier as we're trying to park or something like that. So remember those three categories. We're going to come back to them in just a second. But real quick, to touch on what a game refuge is. State of Alaska defines it as a place that's meant to protect and preserve the natural habitat and game populations of certain designated areas of the state. And so game species are basically consumable animals, so things that people go out and hunt or go out and trap. like animals that we really engage with regularly. So like a moose would be a game species, but a porcupine, I'm 97% sure is considered a non-game species in Alaska. It's Alaska, so they're a non-game species, right? There's no season on them. And they're different than state parks, which have different management goals. They're different than state forests. They're different than state recreation areas. When it's a game refuge, or the title of a land speaks to the intended, or what you want people to be on the land. And so in Alaska, there are 12 wildlife refuges. And Joe Meehan is going to be talking later about more specifically the different kinds of lands and where they are and what's going on with them. But there are 4 that are pretty accessible in south central Alaska. Goose Bay, have you ever been out there? It's way at the end of KGB, but it's so worth it. It's my favorite spot to go watch beluga whales. And it's just really accessible ocean. You can see Anchorage, and it looks like a beautiful faraway city from there, and you can watch the airplanes come in. But there's also some marked trails, and you can go wandering down the beach, depending on the tides. Yeah, don't get too excited, but yeah. Alaska Beach. I've seen people clamming out there. It's just a neat area.
Wow.
Yeah. Similar to, and out in that neighborhood is the Susitna Flats. I hear about it mostly as a duck hunting area, but I bet that the beluga watching in that neighborhood is pretty good too. And then, of course, there's the Palmer Hayflats that anybody who's driven from the valley to Anchorage has driven through and admired, and a number of different access points to that refuge. And then the Anchorage Coastal Wildlife Refuge, and that's the piece that includes Potter Marsh. It's super great, fantastic birding. We'll talk more about that Friends of organization in a second. So, what I'm about to do is kind of highlight a couple Friends of groups throughout Alaska. Things to consider, though. Just about every piece of public land has a Friends of group. This list is by no means exhaustive. And when you're looking for a Friends of group, you have to remember that they're usually volunteer organizations. They go through kind of an ebb and flow of when there's a lot of interest in an organization and they're doing activities every other week, and they have 1,000 followers on Facebook and everybody wants to be where they are, and then maybe board members will change and they kind of die off a little bit until somebody else comes around and starts that fire back up. So that might exist, but it might not be very active. You also, when you find a website, you have to look at it critically. Sometimes they're kind of old and there's a newer one. Again, it's volunteers, and so maybe somebody moved out of state and had the one password to get into the one website host, and then they lost it and nobody can get into the website again and you're stuck. So you'd build a new website with a slightly different name that maybe gets kind of confusing. So if you find a website, it might not be the most accurate one. There might be a better option. Usually the Facebook pages are most correct. They're easy for everybody to use. Not everybody can get organized enough to manage a website, but most people can post on Facebook. And usually the Facebook then can steer you to people you'd want to contact, people, maybe what the real actual website is, information like that. And even if you just write a message saying, hey, do you guys still exist? Facebook is a point where if they do, somebody might be able to reach back out to you. It's not perfect, but people are human. And then not everybody has paid staff. So I manage the APH Instagram page, and I don't really like touching my phone that much. And so if somebody were to message me through that platform, I'm going to get to it when I get to it, rather than somebody who has 9 to 5 office hours, is doing all of the communications for an organization, is reaching out to everybody every single day. That kind of organization might get back to you right away. Otherwise, you might have to wait a week or 2 weeks or something like that. Right. You also need to recognize that they might not have a physical office space. They might have a mailing address, and that might be somebody's home, or just a random P.O. box that a board member 3 years ago rented out, things like that. But they might not have a physical space where you can go to and be like, hello, I would like your help. But just to keep things in mind that they're humans, people running Friends of organizations are humans just like us, and we are all flawed. And busy. And have other priorities. Yeah. Something, too, that I haven't talked about that's kind of important is, why would you be looking for a friends group? As you're looking, a friends group can help you plan trips and give you more information about a specific area. Because they act as those connectors, as those facilitators, as you're planning a trip, they might be able to let you know maybe what's starting to sprout out of the ground in an area, or what birds are migrating through. Or they might say, oh, hey, Jim's not doing anything this afternoon, he can come out and meet you, something like that. So whenever you're planning a trip for your class to go out to a space like that, it's worthwhile to check in with a friends group. And so now, shifting gears, highlighting a couple of Alaskan Friends of groups. And as we go through this, kind of start thinking about, of those 3 rough categories we went back to, where each of these would fit. And so those 3 categories were kind of more lobbying and land acquisition, were supporting environmental education, or supporting interpretation opportunities and recreation opportunities, and then kind of running a store to fund. It's a really basic way of doing that. But so Friends of Alaska Coastal Refuge, that's one of those refuges that we can get to by car easily from South Central Alaska. And they are the same people who do Potter's Marsh Field Day coming up on June 1st. Is that right? June 1st? Yeah. Yes, okay. And what they do, and so from their website for all of these, I took their missions and kind of put them up. And so they observe, they document what they're seeing, they're cleaning up the area, so they're good stewards. They give input for development, they give input for management, and they help collect information for scientists, managers, and other decision makers. They just weighed in there about the Coastal Refuge Interpretive Plan. They had a big role in that. So they do all sorts of cool things. Another cool thing that I noticed about them, and I pulled this from the Fish and Game website, is that they have Potter's Marsh podcasts. And those are something that even if you can't physically go to Potter Marsh, like for you, maybe you're in a classroom for an afternoon but want to bring some outdoors in, you can pull up a podcast and you can set the scene. You can play something about, what spring in Potter Marsh sounds like, and you can bring it to them. Even if you're not at that place, you can still kind of work your way into place-place learning with them. Another one is Friends of McNeil River. And this is a really interesting organization that really works on defending the McNeil River area, and that's where people will fly in and observe brown bears doing all sorts of different things. What they seem to be really ramped up right now, as I was looking at their website and looking at what they have going on, is they're really working on no pebble stuff. And they've had their hands in a number of no pebble activities, and they're hosting volunteer nights and things like that, so they have a very strong political stance on that. Coming up with them, they have their annual meeting, or their spring meeting. It looks like they meet bi-yearly on May 15th at the Anchorage Brewing Company. And it looks like they have the manager of that area speaking. It would be a nice thing to do if you're not doing anything that night. But, and so their mission statement was a little bit trickier to find. It seems a little bit kind of more, less specific, but just saying that they're concerned with the welfare of these bears, and part of that means not having pebble mine.
I think they're a fairly new group as well.
Yeah, it looks like they went through kind of a renaissance.
Yeah.
They were one website where I found an old website and went, nothing's updated past 2013 on this website. Something must be different. And did some digging and found what they're up to now. Another one is Round Island. So this is a refuge that if you wanted to fly out there, you would be flying out of Dillingham. So it's off the coast of western Alaska. and they're the Walrus Islands Game Refuge. And this is another kind of neat organization that really wants to be a voice to raise awareness, to do education, to help enhance opportunities for the public to continue to visit and enjoy, and then to encourage conservation and management of the sanctuary based on sound information, habitats, and cultural resources. And so not only is it based on what's physically happening within that ecosystem, but also the cultural resources it provides for the people who live in that part of Alaska. And so that's another one where it's probably not a refuge where you're ever going to lead a field trip. But by reaching out to this organization, they can help provide you with resources where you can explore that area of Alaska with wherever you are. And then Friends of Campbell Creek. And so Campbell Creek Science Center is a BLM, a Bureau of Land Management. It's a federal group, but they also have a Friends group that helps to support them and helps to enhance the opportunities that they can provide to their community. And so this is different than some of the other organizations we've talked about because they have paid staff who are part of it, and they're able to bring together groups from all over to make programs happen and provide really robust educational opportunities for students who visit them. And as we look at their mission, we can see that it's to support the educational efforts of Campbell Creek Science Center, to enhance outdoor programs and recreation opportunities, and to support research surrounding ecosystems, and to support initiatives addressing public concerns. So while a federal employee might not be able to advocate specifically for something affecting Campbell Creek Science Center, this group can come in and say, hey, actually, the climate is changing and we need this to happen, even though if the employees of this particular facility might not be able to.
One of the things, if I could
Yeah,
add,
go for it.
For Friends of Campbell Creek Science Center also manage how that facility is used. You can rent Campbell Creek Science Center, but you do that through the Friends group. They're the ones that manage that. So there's some fundraising there. They're actually charging you a fair price to use that, but they can collect those funds where the federal government wouldn't be able to do that necessarily. And then they can turn around those funds to use it to, do the rest of their work for their mission. So it kind of works out pretty well. They're very sophisticated.
Well, they've been around a while, haven't they?
Yes,
Mhm.
yes.
Definitely.
I think I got up here in '99, and I think they were around then.
Yes, and they do a lot with the Iditarod as well. A lot of event type things around the Iditarod time at Campbell Creek.
So this one is then a little bit different too. So Friends of Mat-Su State Parks run the store and run things up at Independence Mine. They also run the store at Denali State Park. Yeah. And what they do is they then also provide staffing for these things. And so if you were to be a tour guide at Independence Mine, you're an employee of Friends of Mat-Su State Parks rather than an employee of state parks. And so state parks wouldn't necessarily be able to supply or to fund seasonal staff the way that they do, but this group can step in, make that happen, and make this a really great place to bring people to go visit and to explore and to learn about the history of that area. They also do things within Nancy Lakes and Summit Lake as well. Yeah.
That's a pretty good reach.
Mm-hmm. Mat-Su is big.
It really
It's
is.
roughly the size of Connecticut, and it's operated as just one borough.
Wow.
Yeah. And so this one is a little bit different, and I wanted to include it just to kind of expand your mind of what Friends of groups can be. Also, I love muskox. But it's also a Friends of group. Even though it's not necessarily public land, it's a nonprofit organization that has a Friends of group that helps to support and extend its mission. The official mission is the promotion of Kivute production, so their soft underwool, and a gentle, sustainable agricultural practice. And they also have a focus on public education.
Something on TV, a commercial or a little snippet that they had on like Channel 7
Yeah,
or 8 or something, and the gentleman that runs that farm was talking about it.
exactly. And so something that I like about the Muskox Farm and their public education mission is so many of these places, we look at public lands and we think, okay, I'm going to take my kids there to do science and to study ecology and to study all these wonderful, fantastic things. But you can use these spaces to do so much more than that. Because of their connection to fiber and agriculture, they can tie it into more artistic workshops, or because things like knitting and crocheting tie into applied mathematics so much. You can bring math into it. Or you can bring history into it, too, as it talks about agriculture in Alaska and the original colony settlement and things like that. And so this one isn't like the others, but I wanted to include it just to broaden that sense. So, as we go through these missions and things, there were a whole bunch of words that were repeated. Did any stick out to you guys? Conserve, definitely. Educate. And then everybody wanted to support. So support what's already going on, to enhance what's going on, to improve an area and to protect it. And so as far as Friends of groups, these, you can almost write a Mad Lib with their visions and mission statements, you know?
Sounds familiar with the last conversation.
Excellent. And so that's what they do. Now I'm going to kind of shift and talk more specifically about Alaskans for Palmer Hayflats. For any of you watching, or for you, if you want to talk to us more specifically, this is how to find us. I'm also supposed to highlight the new Instagram page. Just came online. That you might not get a response from, but it's going to be gorgeous. We do have an office on this one. We just don't know if anybody's there ever.
I like your logo because it really outlines the different activities that you can do on the Hayflats. You know, it's right in your face there. You don't have to guess.
Exactly. And that's something with the refuge system too, is we're about conserving, we're about protecting, but pieces of that, do I get a pointer? Yes. But pieces of that also do mean hunting. They do mean working with dogs. They do mean observing. It does mean bird watching. It does mean all these different things, but it's not just a pristine museum environment. It's conserving for people to use and to engage with. And so with Alaskans for Palmer Hayflats, our tagline lately has been from the junkyard to the backyard. And so the history of Palmer Hayflats, just to go into it a little bit, is in the late 90s, early 2000s, a group of passionate people got together and were just bummed that people were dumping garbage in these places, as happens so often in Alaska. And so they got together, they started talking to game managers and organizing to clean up these spaces, to pull out as many of those old rotten out cars as they could, the old refrigerators, the broken couches, things like that, and start turning it into a place where people actually want to be. When I first moved up here, I worked with a group of adults who experienced developmental disabilities, and I wanted to go on an outing to Reflections Lake. And the feedback I got from the rest of the people I worked with, many of whom were old Alaskans, were like, I don't know. It's not just the perception that they had from growing up was that it wasn't a great place to be. And so because of Alaskans for Palmer Hayflats, it is actually a safe place. It is an ADA accessible place. It's possible to comfortably take wheelchairs around the 1 mile track at Reflections Lake and things like that. And so a couple of the spaces I'm talking about, or something too that I have a hard time wrapping my head around, is how big the refuge is. We all know that we drive through it, but we just drive through this one part right here. And so we see Reflections Lake, we can see the exit, and we can see the gate for Rabbit Slough, but we don't necessarily know about the access points off of Fairview Loop, and then and then the newer trail by Makatans Elementary, which is here-ish. So a couple of these places. Rabbit Slough doesn't necessarily have a whole lot of trails. It's mostly a water access point, but you can still find things to do. I don't want to discount, I included this picture of a bumblebee bottom, just to point out that even though pieces of it might look like just a parking area for hunters, when it's not in use, there's still all sorts of incredible biotic things going on, and there's still plenty of different things you can use that space for. And then Reflections Lake, and that's the one we know just off of the highway. A lot of the pictures that we see are in summer, but it's a really great place year-round. Not to be understated when you're planning a trip, they have toilets. That's important. Not all of these different access points, not all trailheads have toilets. They're outhouses, but it's so much better than nothing, especially if you have 31st graders with you. It's a mile-ish walking trail with a couple of different points. There's a viewing tower that's newer. Up to the first platform is from here to here is ADA accessible as well. So if you have anybody with mobility concerns, it's wide, flat. You don't have to haul them up any stairs to get even a good view to just look out across the refuge and point out any moose that you might see or get a good sense of what else is going on. And this remained stable after the earthquake. It was one of the first places that, at least as APH, we went out and was like, what happened to the tower?
Well built.
Yeah. An underrated piece of Reflections Lake is a wetlands trail. And so if you approach the trail and you hang out and you go to the left, sorry, I had to think about that way too hard, and head out to the left, you can follow little signs, and for a little bit it's narrow and muddy, but it opens up on this big, wide space where you can see the Kinnick River coming in, and you can see it almost feels like a completely different ecosystem from what you see on the Reflections Lake Trail. So that, yeah. Lots of wetland plants.
We learned about sedges.
And so this is moving off the highway, or off of Reflections Lake. There's Cottonwood Creek and the Scout Ridge Trail that have roughly the same access point, where you go to Fairview Loop, which is another exit off the highway, so it's not too hard. And you take it to Hayflats Road, and you get to see more of this big open wetland going on. There's a big bridge. There's tidal gut erosion, which doesn't sound that exciting, but it's really neat to tie into different landform actions, erosion actions, geology kind of things. And then these are more pictures from the Scout Ridge Trail and Overlook. Something sad but also kind of interesting is looking at the human history of the area. This picture was taken in 2016, and so it's possible that it's gone now. I can't remember from the last time I was hiking out there, but you can see old cars, which is sad and a goofy thing to point out, but then you can talk about human impact on landscape, you can talk about why they might have gone there, you can talk about how cars have changed, how opportunities to get rid of junky cars have changed, things like that over time. They also have a really gorgeous lake, or there is a really gorgeous lake to look at in comparison to a wetland, in comparison to rivers that you might pass and things like that.
Where do you access that lake? Is that off of the Scout Ridge Trail?
Yeah. And it's
Field trip.
Yeah.
Educator field.
yeah. It's near kind of like the end if you do, like you start where you go up and there's a little bench kind of thing. And keep going. Yeah. And then this is the newest trailhead. It's out by Makatans Elementary, and it's just,
It's a nice one,
I was going to say, isn't it great? This one, Great Land Trust went out, they had a work day day before yesterday, I think, and repaired it. So it's now open again. And it's neat. You wouldn't necessarily want to take 2 or 3 classes out there, but you go out and it ends in kind of an open platform where you can have kind of a gathering space and discussions and things like that.
Can I mention something about the sign?
Yeah.
That you see the animals that are on the sign. It was actually a kindergarten teacher at Makatans who was working with the iTrek program, which we can talk more about. And she wanted to do some signage with the Great Land Trust, and they were trying to figure out how can she connect that to the content standards that she was working with. So we had a consultation, and I suggested that she get these fur bags and talk about the different textures that these kids were feeling in the fur bags, and then replicate that by making paper. What does the color, the stroke, how does it feel? Is it pokey? Is it, what is that texture like? And she actually got some help with another MSOEE graduate, Robin Lockwood, so she could work one-on-one with those students to make the paper, and they generated the animals and put it together to make the signs. So that's all created. They use stencils for the animals, but it's all created by kindergarten students. It's colorful and interesting, and good marriage.
Thanks for coming.
Nice to meet you in person.
Excellent. So then one other quick sidebar on this that I want to talk about is this word.
Yeah.
This is not an English word. This is an Atna word, or an Athabascan word, and something that's really becoming more and more common, and that is just really important, is to recognize Indigenous use of the land and to be able to take a second to see if you can find any first language place names, or even just before you start a field trip or before you bring a group, just to take a moment to be intentional and say something like, let's take a moment to be thankful and celebrate that we get to learn on the traditional lands of whoever's land your traditional home ranger on a day, just as a means to, recognize that the colony settlement project wasn't the first time people existed within a space. The Anchorage Museum has done a really interesting series on decolonizing interpretation that provides a lot of interesting resources as well.
Probably makes an attachment with some of your students too. Oh, my grandmother's,
Exactly. Exactly. And right now, Kinnick Tribal Council, Eklutna Tribe, and Chicklin Village Traditional Council are really working to revitalize Atna and make it more and more accessible.
I don't know how this sounds, but when I first got here, I didn't really see a lot of Native children in the school in the classroom, but now I see a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
A lot more population.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
Exactly. So shifting gears now and thinking about how to actually bring students to this space, considering like best practices for how to plan a trip to public land, because a trip to a refuge isn't necessarily like planning a trip to the Anchorage Museum or planning a trip to the zoo, where there's a staff there to greet you, they have a spiel that they run through, you just kind of show up and you work with them ahead of time. It's more than just showing up. I don't want to short sell that. But where there's somebody there to guide you through. For a lot of these places, if you're bringing a group out there, you as the teacher are going to be the leader for what's going on out there. And so some best practices would be let somebody know that you're going out there. Sometimes you want to make sure that you're not going to be going there at the same time as every other elementary school in your area, right? That could be chaotic. Or there might be like a commercial tour company going through there on a photography tour or something like that. It helps you, reaching out to a friends group or reaching out to a public lands manager can help you get a sense of what other users might be out there. It's always important to pick up after yourself, and often that means more than just leaving it in a garbage can. If a place is used to seeing 2 or 3 people a day and all of a sudden has 60 or 70 students and all of your lunch garbage, you should just take that with you and get rid of it, because it completely changes how garbage cans might be emptied, and overflowing trash cans could attract all sorts of wildlife, and it could turn into a much bigger problem than it needs to be. Letting somebody know might also tell them to send out their maintenance guy the next day or even that afternoon and empty the garbage then. It's also important to stay on the trails, or at the very least minimize the impact on fragile terrain. Again, the usage of 2 or 3 people at one time is very different than a whole classroom, or the impact on the land. It's also important to be conscientious of other trail users, and that might mean working with your students to say, when we see another group, we're going to step to one side so that they don't have to fight their way through all the kindergartners and make it happen. And also to carpool if you're taking private vehicles. You don't want to overwhelm the parking lot. You don't want to end up parking in unsafe ways or on land that wasn't meant to be parked upon. Do you guys have any other best practices that you would consider?
Oh, I'd probably run through the wildlife safety
Oh, definitely.
routine, make sure everybody was remembering, or if there's a safe word, or stay with your partner, that type of thing. I also wondered about priority for trail uses. Like if you've got skiers and dog mushers and then people who are hiking, is there any kind of etiquette that maybe you need to know about when using those trails? Because skiers really don't like it when hikers are poking through their, you know, their tracks. And sometimes there's contentious things happening on the trail because nobody understands what the priority is, if there is one.
It's a lot easier to step off a trail than stop a 12-dog sled dog team.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
We went to Denali not too long, well, a few years ago. When sixth graders went up there, spent a night with them, and the whole thing. And that was really a nice field trip.
Yeah.
I'd like to do that.
Yeah, it was nice.
The other thing that I would probably do in preparation of going to that refuge is decide whether or not I'm going to have some kind of guide in my hand or not, or what kind of prep, or have some sort of focus while we're there, you know, so that it actually turns into meat when it comes to evaluation time. How does it fit in? I mean, just getting outside is great, but if you can also give them something to work toward, I think that's
It was
helpful.
really nice because they had a center there, and the center was working with the class students, and so everything was pretty well planned out as far as what lessons were to be taught, and wolf conservation, and all types of interesting things.
Sure.
They were actually there during that earthquake, one of them.
Wow.
Not this really bad one, but another strong before that. So.
Oh. Which is different from a refuge, because it's usually, I mean, sometimes they'll have a volunteer people who are there to, you know, make sure that everything stays copacetic. Maybe they'll do some education, maybe, but for the most part, you are the interpreter, the guide, safety ranger. You are it. Sure.
Excellent. Something else.
Been unsuccessful ones.
Yeah. Good.
Something else to consider is that in order to take a group of people out there, you might need a special permit. And sometimes it's tricky. These aren't necessarily always enforced, but it's the right thing to do to check in. And for at least Palmer Hayflats, the person to check in with and to talk to about permitting would be Sarah Wilbur, and her contact information is listed here. I know even as Alaskans for Palmer Hayflats, we've gotten a check yourself email from Sarah saying, yeah, we didn't know you were going to be doing a class there today, kind of thing.
Oh.
We're like, sorry.
Well, that's part of that relationship building, right?
Exactly. And so I wanted to make extra sure I put that out there.
Yeah, I think it's Joe Meehan that you would talk to for Pottermarsh if you should ever decide to go out there. And they're actually creating spots, like this is where you could collect macros for sure. I think there is a spot for Palmer Hayflats too, but Sarah would be the one to designate.
Exactly.
This is where you can do it. So
And that's another thing. It's one permit to actually exist as a group on the space. And then if you were doing any collection or anything, if you're depending on what you're doing, you might need additional permits. And like collecting macroinvertebrates or things like that is definitely
Plants.
something. Yeah. Mushrooms.
it probably doesn't cost anything. They just want to know.
Exactly. And so we talked about some of this too, is once you have your permit, you're ready to do your best practices, what are you going to do? And like Brenda was just saying, you're the interpreter, or are you going to be the interpreter? And this is where a Friends of group can often step in and help, as they can guide you on what you might do. They might have publications, and they might even have somebody who can work with you for that, or at least send you towards the direction of somebody who might be available. Some barriers, though, to a field trip like this, because it's not necessarily a facility with a nice indoor space and toilets that flush and a place to eat lunch if it's rainy or windy. There are all sorts of different barriers. Transportation is one. Buses are expensive. Organizing buses can be difficult.
So you have to plan way ahead.
You have to plan way far out. Exactly. Accessibility. Can all of your students actually do the activity that you have in mind or make it through the hike? And that might mean if things are muddy, that could be tricky. It also might mean remembering that little legs can't go as far as bigger legs can. And safety, like wildlife safety, or earlier Brenda was talking about perhaps people, unscrupulous people existing within spaces where you may be taking students, and taking all of those into consideration. Unscrupulous people, yes. Yes.
Trespass.
Yes. What other barriers can you guys think of?
Well, you have to have, besides safety, medical concerns,
Right. But again, that's something too, and a lot of times school administrators will have certain policies that you have to follow. Remembering to take the first aid backpack, remembering to take everybody's inhaler, and being able to actually help people if they need that kind of help. Or EpiPens, people get stung by things. What to do if somebody falls into cow parsnip, things like that, right?
Cow parsnip, yes, for sure. And what about like a mayfly hatch? Or the mosquitoes are really awful right now because it's that hatch season. I bet you a friends group might be able to tell you, or maybe even look on their website. Just know that you might have to bring your mosquito net
Exactly.
at this time. So it may maybe not really a safety issue, but it could be so distracting that it draws the attention away from the big show.
Right.
how much of a survival thing you have to do while you're out there.
Yeah.